The police officer on the phone asked me a question no mother should ever have to answer. Mrs. Johnston, are you confirming that your son sold your vehicle without your permission? My hands shook as I stared at the framed photo of my late husband. Harold. The car Ethan had sold wasn't just a car. It was the last gift Harold ever gave me before cancer took him away. When I whispered, yes. The officer went silent for a moment. Then came the question that changed everything. Would you like to report the vehicle as stolen? I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and reported my own son for stealing my car. If you've ever had your trust broken by someone you loved, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you're joining me today, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Stories like this remind us we're never truly alone. If you enjoy heartfelt family stories, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue sharing this journey together. My name is Darlene Johnston. And until a few months ago, I believed I had done everything right as a mother. I lived alone in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio, at 67 years old. My life wasn't exciting, but it was peaceful. After spending more than 3 decades working as a nurse, I had finally retired. My days were simple. I tended to my flower garden, attended church on Sundays, met friends for coffee twice a week, and volunteered at the local community center whenever I could. It wasn't the life I had imagined when I was younger. The truth was that I had expected to grow old with my husband. Harold Johnston had been my best friend for 42 years. We weren't wealthy. We never lived in a mansion or took luxury vacations. We raised our son, paid our bills, and worked hard every day. But we loved each other deeply. And for me, that was enough. Then cancer took him. Even now, 4 years later, saying those words still hurt. Harold fought for nearly 2 years, through every surgery, every treatment, every sleepless night in hospital rooms. I stayed by his side. I watched the strongest man I had ever known slowly become weaker. Yet somehow, he worried more about me than himself. A few months before he died, he bought me a car. It wasn't a fancy sports car or an expensive luxury vehicle. It was a beautiful dark blue SUV. Reliable, comfortable, safe, perfect for someone my age. I remember arguing with him when he brought it home. Harold, we don't need a new car. He smiled. I know. Then why spend the money? His eyes softened. Because one day you'll be driving it without me. I hated hearing that. I hated every reminder that he wasn't going to survive. But Harold had always been practical. He knew what was coming long before I was ready to accept it. After he passed away, that vehicle became much more than transportation. It became a piece of him. The scent of the leather reminded me of the day we picked it up together. The small scratch near the rear door reminded me of a camping trip we took before he got sick. Every time I sat behind the wheel, I could almost hear his voice beside me. For 4 years, that car stayed in perfect condition. I washed it regularly, changed the oil on schedule, kept every maintenance record. Some people keep jewelry after losing a spouse. Others keep letters. I kept that car. And perhaps that's why what happened later hurt so much. Because my son knew exactly what that vehicle meant to me. Ethan Johnston was 40 years old. When he was born, I thought he was the most beautiful baby I'd ever seen. Like most mothers, I dedicated my life to him. I worked extra shifts to pay for baseball equipment. I missed sleep helping with school projects. I saved money for college. When he graduated from Ohio State University, I cried harder than anyone in the audience. I was proud of him, very proud. For most of his life, Ethan had been a good son. He called often, visited regularly, helped around the house whenever I needed something fixed. After Harold died, Ethan checked on me constantly. At first, his attention comforted me. I thought he was simply worried about his mother living alone. Looking back now, I wonder if that was the moment everything began to change. The biggest difference came after Ethan married Brittany. Now, let me be fair. I didn't dislike Brittany when they first got married. She was intelligent, outgoing, and ambitious. She worked in real estate and always seemed energetic, the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately become the center of attention. But over time, I noticed something. Brittany viewed life differently than Harold and I had. For Harold and me, family always came first. For Brittany, success seemed to come first. Money came first. Status came first. Appearances came first. At family dinners, she often talked about larger houses, expensive vacations, luxury brands, and people she knew who were making more money. Sometimes Ethan joined those conversations. At first, I thought nothing of it. Everyone has dreams. Everyone wants a comfortable life, but little by little, Ethan started changing. The son who once asked how I was feeling began asking different questions. Questions about finances, questions about property, questions about savings, questions about assets. One evening, about a year before everything fell apart, Ethan was helping me organize paperwork in my home office. As we sorted old documents, he casually asked, "Mom, have you updated your will recently?" I looked up. "Why would you ask that?" He shrugged. "Just wondering." "That's not exactly casual conversation." He laughed. "I guess Brittany and I have been talking about estate planning." At the time, his explanation sounded reasonable. Many people his age think about those things. Still, something about the conversation left me uncomfortable. A few weeks later, he asked another question. "How much is the house worth now?" Then, another. "Do you still have the retirement accounts Dad left you?" Then another. "Have you thought about downsizing individually?" None of those questions seemed alarming. Together, they formed a pattern I didn't want to see. Because mothers don't like believing the worst about their children, I certainly didn't. Whenever a warning appeared in my mind, I pushed it away. "That's your son." I told myself, "Stop being suspicious. He's only concerned about you. He's trying to help." But one memory continued bothering me. A memory I couldn't quite forget. about 6 months before my car disappeared. I walked into my garage and found Ethan standing beside it. He wasn't cleaning it. He wasn't inspecting it. He was simply staring at it. When he noticed me, he smiled, still keeping this thing spotless. Huh, I smiled back. Your father would haunt me if I didn't. Ethan laughed. But then he asked a strange question. Have you ever thought about selling it? I immediately shook my head. No. His smile faded slightly. Not even for something newer. No. It's just a car. Mom. I remember placing my hand on the hood. No. Ethan. For the first time, I saw disappointment cross his face. Only for a second. Then it vanished. But now, looking back, I realized something important. That wasn't disappointment. It was frustration. And at the time, I had no idea why. After that conversation in the garage, I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Children grow up. They develop different priorities. They make choices their parents don't always understand. That didn't mean Ethan had become a bad person. At least, that was what I kept telling myself. For a while, life returned to normal. Or at least it appeared to. The phone calls continued. Family dinners continued. Holiday gatherings continued. But underneath the surface, something had changed. The first sign came during Thanksgiving. Ethan and Brittany hosted dinner at their house that year. Their home was beautiful, larger than most people their age could afford. Brittany had decorated every room perfectly. Everything looked like a photograph from a home design magazine. As we sat around the dining table, Brittany suddenly turned toward me. Darlene, have you ever thought about moving closer to us? I smiled politely. I already live 20 minutes away. I mean, moving in with us. The room grew quiet. I laughed softly. I'm not ready for that. Brittany exchanged a quick glance with Ethan. Why not? Because I'm healthy. You don't have to wait until you're sick. I know. Families should stay together. The words sounded kind, but something about her tone felt rehearsed. Almost strategic. Ethan joined the conversation. We just worry about you. Mom. I looked at him. I appreciate that. We'd feel better if you weren't alone. I like living alone. Neither of them seemed pleased by my answer. The conversation quickly moved on to other topics, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just happened. Something small. Something important. A few weeks later, Brittany brought the subject up again. Then again, and again. Sometimes she mentioned it casually. Sometimes she presented it as concern. Sometimes she framed it as a financial decision. You could sell the house and save money. You wouldn't have to maintain such a large property. You'd have more support nearby. The arguments sounded reasonable, but they never felt genuine. What bothered me most was that no one asked what I wanted. They only explained what they thought I should do. The pressure slowly increased. Not enough to start a fight. Just enough to create discomfort. Then Ethan began asking about my finances more frequently. One Saturday afternoon, he stopped by to help replace a broken light fixture in my kitchen. Afterward, we sat at the table drinking coffee. Out of nowhere, he asked, Have you looked at your retirement investments lately? I frowned. Why? Just curious. You seem very curious about my money these days. He laughed. I'm trying to help. I didn't ask for financial advice. His smile faded briefly. Then he changed the subject. At the time, I felt guilty for being suspicious. Now, I wish I had trusted my instincts. A month later, I noticed something else. One evening, I went to retrieve an insurance document from my home office. I kept all important paperwork in a locking filing cabinet beside my desk. As soon as I opened the drawer, I knew something wasn't right. The folders were out of order, not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. The insurance documents had been moved. Vehicle registration papers were sitting in the wrong folder. Several envelopes had been opened and then closed again. I stood there staring for nearly a minute. A strange feeling settled into my stomach. Someone had gone through my files. I knew it. The question was, who? At first, I wondered whether I had simply forgotten moving things myself. Getting older can make you doubt your own memory. But the more I thought about it, the more certain I became. I hadn't touched those files in weeks. The next morning, Ethan stopped by unexpectedly. As we talked in the kitchen, I decided to ask him directly. Ethan, did you happen to look through my office recently? His eyes widened slightly, only for a moment. Then he smiled. Your office? Yes. No? I watched him carefully. The filing cabinet looked different. Oh, he shrugged. Maybe when I was helping you organize papers a few months ago. A few months ago? Could be. The answer felt strange. Too quick. Too prepared. Yet I had no proof, so I let it go. At least outwardly. Inside, my concerns continued growing. Around that same time, Brittany started mentioning my vehicle more often. Every visit seemed to include a comment. That SUV is worth a lot right now. You barely drive anymore. The used car market is strong. One afternoon, she even pulled up online listings. See, she said, people are paying amazing prices. I looked at her. Why are you so interested in my car? She laughed. I'm not interested in your car. Then she immediately returned to talking about its value. The contradiction wasn't lost on me. A few days later, Ethan called. We chatted for several minutes before he casually asked, Where do you keep the title for the SUV? I nearly dropped the phone. What? The title? Why? In case something happens? What kind of something? He hesitated, then laughed. I don't know, just being practical. Practical. That word again, the same word Harold used throughout his illness. The difference was that when Harold said it, I trusted him completely. When Ethan said it, I felt uneasy. As Christmas approached, things became even stranger. Ethan and Brittany invited me over for dinner one evening. Halfway through the meal, Brittany brought up estate planning, again. I think every family should be transparent, she said. I forced a smile. Transparent about what? Assets. The word landed heavily on the table. Ethan looked uncomfortable, but not surprised. As though they had already discussed this privately, Brittany continued. It prevents problems later. What problems? You know? She waved her hand. Inheritance disputes. The room suddenly felt smaller. I put down my fork. Nobody is disputing anything. I'm just saying families should communicate. I looked directly at her. My finances are private. For the first time all evening, silence filled the room. Brittany smiled, but her eyes didn't. That night, as I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. Something was wrong. I didn't know exactly what, but I could feel it. The next morning, I decided to review all my important documents. Insurance papers, property records, bank information, vehicle registration, everything. Most of it appeared normal, until I reached the folder containing my SUV paperwork. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. Then I noticed a photocopy tucked beneath the registration documents. I pulled it out. My heart immediately began pounding. It was a copy of a power of attorney form, a legal document. And at the bottom was a signature that looked disturbingly similar to mine. But it wasn't mine. I knew it instantly. The handwriting was close. Very close, yet not exact. Someone had tried to imitate my signature. For several long seconds, I couldn't breathe. I sat frozen in my chair, staring at the page, wondering why such a document would even exist, wondering who had created it, wondering whether the answer was the one I feared most. And for the first time, a terrifying thought entered my mind. Someone wasn't simply asking questions about my property anymore. Someone might be preparing to take it. For 3 days, I couldn't stop thinking about that document. The photocopied power of attorney form sat on my dining room table while I stared at it from every angle imaginable. I knew the signature wasn't mine. The loops were slightly different. The pressure marks weren't right. Even the way the final letter curved looked unnatural. Whoever had created it had done a decent job, but not good enough. The problem was that I couldn't prove who had done it. And without proof, accusing my own son would destroy our relationship. So I stayed quiet. At least for the moment, I placed the document back inside the folder and locked everything away. Part of me hoped there was some innocent explanation. Maybe a clerical error. Maybe an old form that had somehow been misplaced. Maybe anything other than what I feared. Unfortunately, life has a way of destroying comforting illusions. About 2 weeks later, I woke up on a beautiful Tuesday morning. The sun was shining. The weather was perfect. I planned to drive to a nearby garden center and buy flowers for spring planting. Nothing about that morning felt unusual. I poured coffee, read part of the newspaper, fed the birds in my backyard. Then I grabbed my purse and headed toward the garage. I pressed the automatic door opener. The garage door slowly rose, and my heart stopped. The space where my SUV should have been was empty, completely empty. For several seconds, I simply stood there, confused. Unable to process what I was seeing, I blinked repeatedly. As though the vehicle might somehow reappear, it didn't. My SUV was gone. The dark blue SUV Harold had bought for me. The vehicle I had owned for years. The vehicle parked in that exact spot every single night. Gone. I immediately looked around the driveway. Nothing. I stepped outside. Nothing. I checked the street. Nothing. Panic began rising inside me. My first thought was theft. Someone must have stolen it during the night. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone. I was about to call the police when another thought entered my mind. Ethan. I don't know why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the accumulation of months of strange behavior. Maybe deep down, I already knew the answer. I dialed his number. He answered after 2 rings. "Hey, Mom." His voice sounded calm. Far too calm. "Ethan. Everything okay?" "My SUV is gone." There was a brief pause. Then he sighed. "Not surprise? Not concern." A sigh, as if he had been expecting this call. "Mom." My stomach tightened. "What?" Another pause. Then he said 5 words that changed everything. "I sold it for you." The world seemed to tilt. "What did you just say?" "I sold it." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "You sold my car." "Mom." "Calm down." "Calm down." His voice carried the same tone someone might use with an upset child. "We talked about this." "No, we didn't." "You don't need that vehicle anymore." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Ethan, that vehicle belongs to me." "I know. Then how could you sell it? We were helping you. Not I. We, meaning Brittany, was involved." My chest felt tight. "Helping me," I repeated. "Mom, you're 67. The words hit harder than he probably intended. "You barely drive." "That's not true." "You don't need a vehicle that expensive." "It isn't your decision." "You're overreacting." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Overreacting? My son had just admitted selling my property without permission. And I was overreacting before I could answer. Another voice appeared. Brittany. She was obviously listening. "Darlene, please don't make this dramatic." I closed my eyes. The anger building inside me was unlike anything I had ever felt. "You knew about this." "Of course. Of course." "We thought you'd be grateful." "Grateful." The word nearly made me laugh. "What exactly am I supposed to be grateful for?" Brittany's tone remained calm. "Almost rehearsed. The money helped us secure the down payment on our new house." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. "What? The market is competitive right now." I felt cold. Ice cold. "You used money from my vehicle." It's not like the money disappeared. The audacity of that statement left me speechless. "Ethan," my voice trembled. "Tell me she's joking." Silence. That silence told me everything. "No," he finally said. My knees nearly gave out. I sat down on a step inside the garage, trying to process what I was hearing. My son had sold my vehicle without permission, used the money, and somehow believed I would understand. The betrayal felt overwhelming. But what came next was even worse. "Mom," Ethan said carefully, We already signed paperwork on the house. I stared ahead, unable to speak. So please don't create problems. Create problems. Those words echoed in my mind. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I made a mistake. Not, I should have asked. Just don't create problems. For him. For Brittany. For their plans. As though my feelings were merely an inconvenience. As though my ownership of the vehicle was a technicality. A small obstacle standing in the way of what they wanted. I finally found my voice. How did you sell it? Another pause. Then Ethan answered. I handled the paperwork. What paperwork? What? The title. My heartbeat accelerated. The title. Immediately. My thoughts returned to the strange document. The forged signature. The questions about paperwork. The filing cabinet. Every warning sign suddenly aligned. One after another, like pieces of a puzzle finally snapping together. Ethan, my voice was barely above a whisper. Did you forge my signature? The silence that followed felt endless. I didn't need an answer. I already had one. Because innocent people don't hesitate. Innocent people don't search for excuses. Innocent people don't stay quiet. Finally, Brittany spoke. Darlene, nobody forged anything. Then explain it. We had authority. Authority. My stomach dropped. Authority. The exact words someone would use if they believed a power of attorney document existed. I suddenly realized something terrifying. They thought they were protected. They thought whatever paperwork they had created would hold up. They genuinely believed they had the right to do this. And that meant this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't emotional. It was planned. Carefully planned. For months, perhaps longer. I slowly stood up. Every muscle in my body felt rigid. Ethan. Mom. Where is my vehicle? I don't know exactly. What do you mean you don't know? It was sold through a dealer. My eyes widened. A dealer. Not a private buyer. A dealer. Meaning there would be records. Contracts. Paper trails. Evidence. For the first time since the conversation began, something shifted inside me. The shock was still there. The heartbreak was still there. But another emotion was beginning to emerge. Determination. I ended the call, without another word. Within seconds, my phone started ringing. First Ethan, then Brittany, then Ethan again. I ignored every call. Instead, I walked back inside the house, opened my filing cabinet, pulled out every vehicle document I owned, and began searching for the truth. Because one thing had become painfully clear. My son hadn't just taken my car. He had taken something that didn't belong to him. And before this was over, I intended to find out exactly how he had done it. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Ethan's voice. I sold it for you. The words replayed endlessly in my mind. Not because they were true. Because they were a lie disguised as kindness. My son hadn't sold my vehicle for me. He had sold it for himself. And somehow, that realization hurt more than the missing car. Around midnight, I spread every document I owned across my dining room table. The vehicle title, insurance records, registration papers, maintenance receipts, tax documents, anything remotely connected to the SUV. I checked each page carefully, again and again, looking for something I had missed, looking for a legal explanation, looking for proof that perhaps I was misunderstanding the situation. But the facts remained the same. The vehicle was registered solely in my name. There was no valid power of attorney, no transfer authorization, no signed sale agreement, nothing. The more I reviewed the paperwork, the more obvious the truth became. Someone had committed fraud. And the person most likely responsible was my own son. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I found myself standing in front of Harold's photograph. The same photograph that sat on the bookshelf in my living room. It had been taken during our 25th wedding anniversary trip. He was smiling, happy, confident. The man who always knew exactly what to do. "I wish you were here," I whispered. Tears filled my eyes. For years after Harold died, I continued talking to him when life became difficult. Some people might find that strange. I didn't care. Sometimes speaking to him helped me hear my own thoughts more clearly. And that night, I desperately needed clarity. "What would you do?" I asked. Of course. There was no answer, just silence. Yet as I stared at his picture, I suddenly remembered something. A conversation we had years earlier, long before his illness, long before retirement, long before any of this happened. A friend of ours had been cheated by a family member in a business dispute. I remembered feeling shocked that someone could betray their own relatives. Harold's response had stayed with me. "If you let people steal from you once," he had said, "they'll do it forever." At the time, I thought he was talking about money. Now I understood he was talking about boundaries, respect, consequences. The memory stayed with me until dawn. By 7 o'clock the next morning, I had made a decision. I was going to the police. The drive to the station felt surreal. Actually, that wasn't true. I wasn't driving. For the first time in years, I had to call a taxi. That small detail hurt more than I expected. As I sat in the back seat, I stared out the window. Every passing SUV reminded me of mine, of Harold, of everything Ethan had taken. The police station wasn't intimidating. It was an ordinary building. Plain brick walls, simple parking lot, American flags waving near the entrance. Yet, as I walked inside, my heart pounded harder than it had in decades. I wasn't there to report a stranger. I wasn't there to report a criminal. I was there to report my son. A young officer directed me to a desk where a detective introduced himself. Detective Raymond Brooks. He appeared to be in his early 50s, calm, professional, kind eyes. "What can I help you with today, ma'am?" for a moment. I couldn't answer. The words felt impossible to say. Then I took a deep breath. "My son sold my vehicle without my permission." The detective's expression immediately changed. Not shock, focus. He opened a notebook. "Start from the beginning." So I did. I explained everything, the strange questions, the missing paperwork, the forged signature, the disappearing vehicle, the phone call. The admission, every detail. Detective Brooks listened without interrupting, occasionally taking notes, occasionally asking for clarification. Nearly an hour passed before I finished. Sessa. When I finally stopped speaking, the room felt unusually quiet. The detective leaned back slightly. Do you have documentation proving ownership? I handed him the folder. Everything is here. He spent several minutes reviewing the paperwork. Then he nodded. The vehicle appears to be registered solely in your name. That's correct. And you never authorized the sale? No. Never signed transfer documents? No. Never granted legal authority? No. The detective closed the folder. His expression remained neutral. Professional. But I could tell he understood the seriousness of the situation. This could potentially involve fraud, theft, and forgery. Hearing those words spoken aloud made my stomach tighten. Fraud, theft, forgery, words normally associated with criminals. Not sons, not family, not the little boy I once held in my arms. Detective Brooks looked at me carefully. Mrs. Johnston, before we proceed, I need to ask an important question. I already knew what was coming, and suddenly I wasn't sure I was ready. The detective folded his hands. If this investigation moves forward, your son could face serious legal consequences. I nodded slowly. I understand. This may result in criminal charges? My throat tightened. I understand. He paused, giving me one final opportunity, one final chance to walk away. Are you certain you want to continue? The question hung in the air. Heavy. Painful. Final? I looked down at my hands. Hands that had worked double shifts to support Ethan. Hands that had bandaged scraped knees. Hands that had applauded at graduations. Hands that had comforted him through heartbreaks and disappointments. I loved my son. Nothing would ever change that. But love wasn't the issue. Trust was. Respect was. Accountability was. For months, perhaps years, Ethan had been making choices. Choices that led us here. Not me. Him. And if I protected him now, what would happen next? The house, my savings, my retirement, my independence. Would there ever be a limit? Or would every act of forgiveness simply teach him that he could take whatever he wanted? Suddenly, Harold's voice echoed inside my memory again. If you let people steal from you once, they'll do it forever. I lifted my head, looked directly at Detective Brooks, and answered. Yes, the detective nodded. Then he slid a report across the desk. I'll need your signature. My hand trembled slightly as I picked up the pen. Not because I doubted my decision, because I understood its consequences. Once I signed that report, there would be no pretending this hadn't happened. No family secret, no private misunderstanding, no quiet resolution. This would become official, real, permanent. I signed my name, Darlene Johnston. The ink seemed darker than usual. Heavier. When I handed the form back, Detective Brooks glanced at it and nodded. It's done. I exhaled slowly. The sound felt almost like surrender, or perhaps freedom. I wasn't sure which. As I stood to leave, My phone vibrated. A text message from Ethan. "Mom, please call me." A second message arrived almost immediately. "We need to talk." Then a third. "Don't do anything you'll regret." I stared at the screen. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt strangely calm. Because the decision had already been made, and whether Ethan realized it or not, the conversation was no longer between him and me. Now it involved the law. I underestimated how quickly bad news could spread through a family. Less than 24 hours after I filed the police report, my phone began ringing nonstop. At first, it was Ethan, then Brittany, then Ethan again. After that came cousins, an aunt, a nephew, even people I hadn't spoken to in months. Someone had clearly started telling their version of the story. And judging by the reactions I received, I was being painted as the villain. I ignored most of the calls. I simply wasn't ready. The situation was painful enough without defending myself to every relative who suddenly believed they knew the truth. But by the second day, the pressure became impossible to avoid. Around noon, my doorbell rang. I looked through the window and immediately felt my stomach tighten. Ethan was standing outside. Brittany stood beside him. And behind them were my 2 grandchildren, 8-year-old Madison and 11-year-old Carter. My heart broke instantly. The children shouldn't have been involved. Not like this. I opened the door. Before I could say anything, Ethan walked inside. His face was red. His jaw was tight. I had seen him angry before, but never like this. "Mom, what were you thinking?" No greeting, no apology, no remorse, just anger. I slowly closed the door. "I could ask you the same question." Brittany crossed her arms. "This has gone way too far." I stared at her. "No. Selling my car went too far." Ethan threw his hands into the air. "It wasn't stealing. It was my property. We were going to explain everything." "You already explained it." The children stood silently near the entryway, confused, nervous, watching adults behave badly. I hated that they were witnessing this. "Ethan," I said quietly, "the kids shouldn't be here. They're part of this family." "No, they're being used." His expression darkened. For a moment, I thought he might actually listen. Instead, he took another step forward. "You reported me to the police because you sold my vehicle. It was just a car." Those 4 words hit me harder than I expected. Just a car. To him, perhaps, but not to me. Not to Harold. Not to the memories attached to it. Not to the principle involved. "It wasn't just a car, Mom. It was mine." The room fell silent. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then Brittany sighed dramatically. "Darlene, do you understand what you've done?" I looked directly at her. Yes. Ethan could lose everything. I almost laughed. The irony was unbelievable. My son had taken something from me. Yet somehow, I was responsible for the consequences. "What exactly have I done?" I asked. "You made this a criminal matter." "No." I shook my head. Ethan made it a criminal matter." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Because everyone in the room knew I was right. Even Ethan. Especially Ethan. But admitting that would require accepting responsibility. And responsibility was the one thing neither he nor Brittany seemed willing to accept. The argument continued for nearly an hour. The same points repeated over and over. They needed the money. They intended to tell me eventually. They thought they were helping. They didn't expect me to react this way. Every excuse sounded worse than the one before. Not once did either of them simply say, "We were wrong." Not once. Eventually, the conversation took an even uglier turn. Ethan sat down across from me and folded his arms. His voice suddenly became calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that often appears before something cruel. "You know what people are saying?" I frowned. "What people?" "The family." I already knew where this was going. "They think you're confused." The words landed heavily. Confused. Not angry. Not betrayed. Confused. I felt my heartbeat quicken. "What does that mean?" Ethan shrugged. "You're getting older." I stared at him. Slowly. Carefully. Unable to believe what I was hearing. "You think I'm confused?" "I'm saying maybe you're not remembering everything correctly." The betrayal I felt at that moment was unlike anything I had experienced before. Worse than the missing car. Worse than the lies. Because now my own son was questioning my mind. My judgment. My reality. Brittany quickly joined in. We've both been worried for a while. My eyes shifted toward her. Worried about what? "You've seemed forgetful." Forgetful. The word echoed through my head. Suddenly, dozens of earlier conversations made sense. Questions about my finances. Questions about my independence. Questions about moving in with them. Questions about legal documents. The pieces were beginning to fit together, and I didn't like the picture they were creating. "You've discussed this before, haven't you?" I asked quietly. Neither answered immediately. That silence told me everything. The realization made me feel physically ill. They hadn't simply wanted my assets. They had been building a narrative, a story. One where I was becoming incapable of managing my own life. One where they would eventually step in and take control. Perhaps even legally. The thought was terrifying. Not because it might work. Because my own son was willing to try. "Ethan." My voice was calm now. Dangerously calm. "Do you honestly believe I'm incapable of making decisions?" His eyes shifted away. For the first time, uncertainty appeared on his face. But only briefly. "We just want what's best for you." There it was again. That phrase. The one people use when they want control. The one people use when they don't respect your choices. The one people use when they think they know better than you. I stood up. The conversation was over. "Leave," Ethan blinked. "What? Leave my house." "Mom, now!" Brittany looked shocked. "You can't be serious." I turned toward the front door. Out. The children looked frightened. That hurt more than anything. I walked over and gently hugged both of them. I love you very much. Neither child understood what was happening, and I prayed they never would. A few minutes later, the house was empty again. The silence felt overwhelming, but at least it was honest silence. Not manipulation, not excuses, not lies. That evening, things became even worse. A cousin called, then another, then an old family friend. The rumors had spread. According to various versions of the story, I was overreacting. I was confused. I was lonely. I was punishing Ethan unfairly. I was destroying my family. Listening to those accusations hurt. Yet, beneath the pain, something unexpected happened. My resolve grew stronger. Because every rumor proved one thing. Ethan wasn't trying to make things right. He was trying to protect himself. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen, thinking, remembering, analyzing, and eventually I made another decision. I purchased a small digital recorder. The next morning, I carried it inside my purse. I hoped I would never need it, but I no longer trusted verbal conversations. Too many words had already been twisted. Too many facts had already been rewritten. If Ethan and Brittany wanted to create stories, I needed evidence. Real evidence. Because deep inside, I had a growing feeling this situation wasn't over. In fact, it felt like it was only beginning. And for the first time, I started wondering how far Ethan was willing to go to get what he wanted. 3 days after Ethan and Brittany stormed out of my house, Detective Brooks called. His voice sounded professional as always, but I immediately sensed there was news. Mrs. Johnston, do you have a few minutes? Of course. I'd like to update you on the investigation. I sat down at my kitchen table. For the first time in days, I felt genuinely nervous. The investigation had become real, far more real than I ever imagined when I signed that police report. What did you find? I asked. We've confirmed that the vehicle was sold through a licensed dealership. I closed my eyes. Part of me had still hoped Ethan was exaggerating. Perhaps the vehicle hadn't actually been sold. Perhaps there was some misunderstanding. That last small piece of denial disappeared. And the dealership provided documentation. My heartbeat quickened. Documentation? Transfer paperwork? The room suddenly felt smaller. And the signature. There was a pause. We're still reviewing that. I knew what that meant. The signature was now part of an official investigation. The detective continued. The dealership manager also stated your son presented himself as someone authorized to complete the transaction. Authorized? That word again? The same word Brittany had used. The same word that had haunted me ever since finding the suspicious document. Do they have copies? I asked. Yes. Can I see them? Eventually. Eventually, the waiting was becoming unbearable. After ending the call, I sat quietly for several minutes, thinking. The deeper the investigation went, the more complicated everything became. And the more I realized I needed legal guidance, not just police involvement. Legal guidance. Someone who understood documents. Fraud. Estate issues. someone who could help me protect myself. That's when I thought of William Carter. The name immediately brought back memories. William wasn't just a lawyer. He had been one of Harold's closest friends for more than 30 years. The two men played golf together, attended church together, helped each other through countless life events. When Harold became sick, William had visited regularly. And after Harold passed away, he had handled much of the estate paperwork. I hadn't spoken to him in nearly a year, but something told me it was time. I called his office. To my surprise, he remembered me immediately. "Darlene." His warm voice brought unexpected comfort. "It's been too long." "Yes, it has." "How are you doing?" For a moment, I almost laughed. How was I doing? My son had sold my vehicle. Half my family believed I was losing my mind, and a police investigation was underway. "I've been better." His tone immediately changed. "What happened?" We arranged to meet the following afternoon. When I arrived at William's office, he greeted me with a hug. He looked older than I remembered. More gray hair, a few additional wrinkles, but the same kind eyes, the same calm presence. For the first time in weeks, I felt safe. We sat in his office, and I told him everything, absolutely everything. The questions about money, the pressure from Brittany, the suspicious paperwork, the missing vehicle, the police report, the rumors, the accusations about my mental health. All of it. William listened carefully, occasionally taking notes, occasionally shaking his head. By the time I finished, his expression had become very serious. "This is worse than I expected." My stomach tightened. "Worse?" He leaned back in his chair. "Darlene, if what you're telling me is accurate, there are multiple legal concerns here." I looked down. Part of me hated hearing that, because legal concerns meant Ethan's actions were becoming harder to excuse. William held out his hand. "May I see the documents?" I handed him the folder. He spent nearly 20 minutes reviewing everything, page after page, occasionally adjusting his glasses, occasionally making notes. Finally, he stopped. Then he picked up the photocopied power of attorney document, the same document that had terrified me weeks earlier. "What do you think?" I asked. William studied the signature, longer than I expected. Then he placed the paper on his desk. "I can't make a final determination, but..." His eyes met mine. "I would be very surprised if this signature is authentic." A chill ran through me. Even though I already suspected that answer, hearing it from a professional felt different, more real, more dangerous, more final. William continued examining the paperwork. Then suddenly he stopped again. This time his reaction was different, subtle, but noticeable. His eyes narrowed slightly. "What is it?" I asked. Instead of answering immediately, he looked at me. "Darlene, can I ask you a strange question?" "Of course." "Has anyone discussed the SUV specifically with you over the years?" I frowned. "What do you mean? Anything unusual?" The question caught me off guard. For a moment, I wasn't sure how to answer. Then a memory surfaced. A very old memory, something Harold had said years ago. Actually, Several times. I sat back slowly. Harold loved that vehicle. William nodded. I know. He was oddly protective of it. William remained silent, listening, encouraging me to continue. I thought carefully, trying to remember details I hadn't considered in years. Then another memory appeared, much clearer, much stronger. The final months before Harold's death. One evening, we had been sitting together in the garage, looking at the SUV, talking about the future, talking about things neither of us wanted to discuss. That's when Harold had said something strange. Something that made no sense at the time. Never let anyone take that vehicle without your permission. I had laughed. Why would anyone take my car? He hadn't laughed back. Instead, he had repeated it. More seriously. Promise me? Back then, I assumed he was speaking emotionally, perhaps trying to hold on to something familiar. Now I wasn't so sure. William's expression became thoughtful. Anything else? I searched my memory. Then another fragment surfaced. He mentioned a lockbox once. William immediately looked up. A lockbox. Yes. I don't remember much. What exactly did he say? I closed my eyes, trying to reconstruct the conversation. He said there were things I might need someday. William sat completely still. The silence in the room felt heavy, important. What kind of things? He asked. I never asked. Why not? I gave a sad smile. Because Harold was alive. For years, there had been no reason to ask. No reason to worry. No reason to investigate. William slowly folded his hands. Then he said something unexpected. Darlene, I think we need to locate that vehicle as soon as possible. My pulse quickened. Why? He hesitated, carefully choosing his words. Because I have a feeling your husband may have left something inside it. I stared at him, unable to speak. What kind of something? I don't know. The honesty in his answer made it even more unsettling. But Harold was meticulous. I nodded. Very meticulous. He planned everything. I nodded again, even more strongly. Which means if he repeatedly emphasized that vehicle. William paused. There may be a reason. Suddenly, my missing SUV felt different. Before, it had been a stolen possession, a cherished memory, a symbol of betrayal. Now it might be something more, much more. And as I drove home that evening, one terrifying thought refused to leave my mind. What if Ethan hadn't sold the SUV simply because he wanted money? What if he had been looking for something that night? I barely slept. William's words kept echoing through my mind. What if Harold left something inside it for years? I had viewed the SUV as a memory, a symbol, a connection to my husband. I had never seriously considered the possibility that Harold might have hidden something inside it. Yet, the more I thought about it, the more it sounded like something he would do. Harold had always been a planner. He prepared for everything. Retirement, emergencies, insurance policies, college funds, home repairs, even his own death. especially his own death. During the final months of his illness, he spent countless hours organizing documents, labeling folders, updating records, writing notes. At the time, I thought he was simply trying to make life easier for me after he was gone. Now I wondered whether there had been another reason. The following morning, I pulled out several old storage boxes from a closet. Boxes I hadn't opened since Harold died. Photographs, tax records, old letters, family keepsakes. I spent hours sorting through them, searching for anything related to the SUV, anything related to a lockbox, anything related to Harold's final instructions. Most of what I found was ordinary. Receipts, insurance paperwork, vehicle maintenance records, old vacation photos. Then, shortly after noon, I found something interesting. It was a small spiral notebook. One Harold used during the final year of his life. Nothing formal. Just personal notes, reminders, random thoughts, medical appointments. I carefully flipped through the pages. Most entries were mundane, until I reached one particular note. The handwriting immediately caught my attention, because Harold had underlined it twice. Darlene must remember. That was all. No explanation, no details, just those 3 words. I stared at the page for several minutes. Darlene must remember. Remember what the note offered no answers, only more questions. I took the notebook to William later that afternoon. He examined it carefully. "What do you think?" I asked. "I think your husband was trying to tell you something." I laughed bitterly. "That doesn't narrow it down very much." "No," he smiled slightly. "It doesn't." Then his expression became serious again. "Any mention of the lockbox?" I shook my head. "Nothing." William tapped his fingers against the desk. Thinking, analyzing. Then he asked a question I hadn't considered. "Did Ethan ever hear Harold talk about it?" I froze. The possibility had never crossed my mind. "I don't know." "Think carefully." I tried. Searching years of memories, family dinners, hospital visits, conversations in living rooms and waiting rooms. Anything. Finally, I shook my head. "I honestly don't remember." William nodded slowly. "But it's possible." That single sentence changed everything. Because if Ethan knew about the lockbox, then the entire situation looked different. Very different. The vehicle sale might not have been primarily about money. It might have been about access. Access to something hidden inside the SUV. The thought unsettled me deeply. That evening, Detective Brooks called again. This time his tone sounded different. More focused. More urgent. "Mrs. Johnston, we've located the dealership owner." I sat up immediately. "Did he say anything?" "He confirmed your son handled the entire transaction personally." That wasn't surprising. "What else?" "There was something unusual." My pulse quickened. "What?" "The dealership manager stated your son spent a significant amount of time searching through the vehicle before finalizing the sale." I nearly dropped the phone. "What do you mean, searching?" "He inspected the glove compartment." I felt my stomach tighten. The detective continued. "The storage compartments, Another knot formed in my chest. The rear cargo area. I closed my eyes. And finally, the hidden compartment beneath the cargo floor. The room went silent. For several seconds, neither of us spoke, because both of us understood what that information meant. Ethan was looking for something, I whispered. Detective Brooks didn't answer immediately, but he didn't disagree. What happened next? I asked. The manager said your son appeared frustrated. Frustrated, not relieved, not excited, frustrated, as though he had expected to find something and failed. The realization sent chills through my body. Because frustration only occurs when someone has a goal, a target, an objective, and apparently Ethan hadn't achieved his. After ending the call, I sat motionless at my kitchen table, trying to absorb everything. The questions were multiplying faster than the answers. Did Ethan know about the lockbox? Had he discovered it accidentally? Had Brittany learned about it somehow? What exactly did they think was inside? And perhaps most importantly, had they found it? That question haunted me. Because if the lockbox existed and Ethan had already recovered it, we might never know. The contents could be gone forever. The next morning brought another unexpected development. My phone rang shortly after breakfast. The caller ID showed Ethan's number. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Then I remembered the recorder inside my purse. I pressed the record button and answered. Hello. His voice sounded different, less angry, more nervous. Mom, what do you want? A long silence followed. Then, can we talk? I almost laughed. We've been talking for weeks. Not like this. His voice was shaky. Something was wrong. I could hear it. What happened? Another silence. Then Ethan said something that immediately raised every alarm in my mind. I need you to drop the investigation. My heartbeat accelerated. Not because of the request, because of the fear in his voice. Why? Please. Why? It's getting out of control. I leaned back in my chair, listening carefully, analyzing every word. Out of control for who? He didn't answer. Ethan. Still nothing. Then he spoke again, and his next sentence changed everything. There are things you don't understand. My grip tightened around the phone. What things? You should just let this go. No. Mom. No. For the first time. Genuine panic entered his voice. Not frustration. Not anger. Panic. The difference was impossible to miss. You don't know what you're getting into. I sat perfectly still. Those words repeated inside my head. You don't know what you're getting into. That wasn't the response of an innocent person. It wasn't even the response of someone worried about criminal charges. It sounded like someone protecting a secret. A very important secret. Ethan, my voice became calm. What are you hiding? The silence lasted nearly 10 seconds. Then the call disconnected. I stared at the phone. Heart pounding, mind racing. The conversation had answered one question. Ethan was afraid, truly afraid. And fear usually points toward something valuable, something dangerous, something worth hiding. Later that evening, I met William again and played the recording. When it ended, he remained silent for several moments. Then he looked directly at me. Darlene, what? I don't think your son sold that vehicle for the money. A chill moved through my body. Because deep down, I had already reached the same conclusion. William folded his hands. I think he was looking for something. I nodded slowly. So do I. The room became quiet. Neither of us wanted to say the next thought aloud. But eventually, I did. What if he already found it? William's expression darkened. Then we need to find out exactly what was inside that lockbox. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized the missing SUV might only be the beginning of a much larger story. By the beginning of the next week, the investigation had gained momentum. For the first time since reporting the vehicle stolen, I felt like actual progress was being made. Detective Brooks called early Monday morning. Darlene, we received additional records from the dealership. I immediately grabbed a notebook. What kind of records? Security footage. My pulse quickened. For weeks, everything had been based on conversations, suspicions, and paperwork. Video evidence was different. Video didn't lie. What does it show? It shows Ethan. I closed my eyes. Even after everything that had happened, hearing those words still hurt. He arrived alone. Initially, the detective paused. Then Brittany arrived later. That didn't surprise me. Not anymore. At this point, I viewed them as partners in the entire scheme. What are they doing in the footage? Detective Brooks exhaled slowly. They're searching the vehicle. My stomach tightened. The exact words William and I had feared. Searching, not inspecting, searching. The distinction mattered. A lot. Can you be more specific? I asked. The footage shows Ethan opening multiple compartments. I said nothing. The glove box, silence. The center console, more silence. The rear cargo area, I gripped the phone harder. Then came the statement that changed everything. The footage also shows Ethan removing something from beneath the cargo floor. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. What? The detective continued. The object appears to be a small metal box. The room began spinning. A metal box? A lockbox? The lockbox. My mind immediately flashed back to Harold. His warnings, his strange instructions, his insistence that nobody take the SUV. William had been right. There really had been something hidden inside. And Ethan had found it. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Not because the box existed, because my son had known where to look. That detail mattered more than anything else. People don't accidentally search a hidden compartment beneath a cargo floor. They search it because they're looking for something specific. Did he open it? I asked. We can't determine that from the footage. Did he keep it? Yes. The answer landed like a hammer. Yes, he kept it. The detective continued. The object was placed into a backpack. My heart sank. Then what? He left the dealership and the vehicle. It was sold later that day. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The SUV had never been the real target. The lockbox had. The vehicle was merely the means to obtain it. When I met William later that afternoon, I relayed everything. He listened carefully, then stood up and walked toward the window, a habit he had whenever he was thinking. This changes the entire case. I know. No. He turned toward me. You don't understand. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? William sat down again. The sale itself was already problematic. I nodded. But now we have evidence suggesting intent. Intent. Premeditation? The word felt heavy. Dangerous. Because premeditation meant planning, preparation, purpose. Not a mistake, not poor judgment, not confusion, a deliberate act. William folded his hands. The hidden compartment is critical. I nodded. Because Ethan knew where to look. Exactly. The room fell silent. We were both thinking the same thing. How had Ethan learned about the lockbox? Neither of us had an answer. 2 days later, another development arrived. This time from Detective Brooks. His voice sounded unusually serious. We interviewed Ethan. I sat up immediately. And the detective hesitated. He admitted selling the vehicle. Not surprising. That part was impossible to deny. And the lockbox. Another pause. Then, he admitted taking it. My heart pounded. Finally. An admission, at least partially. What did he say was inside? He claims he never opened it. I laughed bitterly. Neither the detective nor I believed that. You don't believe him? No. The answer came instantly. Not even a second of hesitation. What else did he say? Detective Brooks shuffled papers. He stated Brittany encouraged him to look for the box. My eyes widened. What? He claims the entire idea originated with her. There it was. The blame shifting had begun. Part of me expected it. Still, hearing it aloud was painful. After months of acting as a united front, Ethan was suddenly willing to sacrifice Brittany. Not because he had discovered morality, because he was scared, very scared. What exactly did he say? The detective read directly from his notes. He stated that Brittany believed your late husband had hidden important documents inside the vehicle. I exchanged a look with William, who was sitting across from me during the call. Both of us immediately understood the significance. Important documents. Not cash, not jewelry, documents. Somehow Brittany had learned enough to know what they were looking for, but not enough to know exactly what. After the call ended, William remained unusually quiet. Finally, he spoke. Darlene. What? I think we're about to learn something very uncomfortable. I already knew what he meant. The information about the lockbox hadn't come from nowhere. Someone had told them. Or they had discovered it somehow. Either possibility raised troubling questions. 3 days later, those questions received partial answers. Detective Brooks requested another meeting. This time in person. When I arrived, he placed a folder on the table. I need you to look at something. Inside were printed text messages, hundreds of them, messages recovered through a warrant, messages between Ethan and Brittany. My stomach turned. part of me didn't want to read them. But I forced myself. The first several pages discussed money, debt, mortgage payments, credit cards, financial stress. Then the conversation shifted. One message immediately caught my attention. "Brittany, your dad definitely hid something." "Ethan, how do you know Brittany because your mom mentioned it years ago?" My pulse accelerated. Years ago. Apparently, I had said something without realizing its importance. I continued reading. "Brittany, nobody protects a vehicle like that unless something is inside." "Ethan, maybe." "Brittany, we need to find out." The next messages became even worse. Weeks of planning. Weeks of discussion. Weeks of strategy. They talked about paperwork, vehicle ownership, power of attorney. My stomach twisted as I read, because the conversations proved something devastating. The sale wasn't impulsive. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't the result of temporary financial pressure. It was a plan. A long-term plan. One they had discussed repeatedly. Then I reached a message that made my blood run cold. "Brittany, if she won't cooperate, we'll prove she can't manage things herself." I stared at the screen, unable to breathe, unable to move, unable to think. William slowly reached over and took the paper from my hands, because he could see what that sentence had done to me. The accusation of confusion, the rumors, the questions about my memory, the discussions about moving in. The estate planning conversations, everything suddenly made sense. It had never been concern. It had never been love. It had been preparation. Preparation to control my life, my finances, my assets, perhaps even my future. Tears filled my eyes, not because of the money, not because of the vehicle, because of the betrayal, the calculated betrayal. When I finally looked up, Detective Brooks was watching me carefully. "Darlene," his voice was gentle. "I'm sorry," I nodded. Unable to speak, then he opened another folder, and what he showed us next would change the entire investigation. Because the lockbox had finally been recovered. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The words Detective Brooks had just said echoed through the room. "The lockbox has been recovered." I stared at him, then at William, then back at the detective. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. After weeks of uncertainty, weeks of questions, weeks of wondering whether the lockbox even existed, it had finally been found. "Where?" I asked. Detective Brooks opened the folder. It was recovered during a search of Ethan and Brittany's residence. A strange mixture of emotions washed over me. Relief, fear, curiosity, dread, because now there would finally be answers. And answers can sometimes hurt more than questions. "Was it opened?" William asked. "Yes." The detective's answer came immediately. Of course, it had been opened. Neither Ethan nor Brittany had gone through all of this trouble just to leave it untouched. "What was inside?" I asked. The detective hesitated. "Before we discuss that, there are other findings you need to understand." My stomach tightened. Other findings. That rarely meant anything good. He slid several financial reports across the table. These documents relate primarily to Brittany. William immediately began reviewing them. I watched his expression change with every page. Concern, disbelief, then something close to shock. "What is it?" I asked. William slowly removed his glasses. "Darlene." His voice sounded unusually heavy. "How bad is it?" He glanced at Detective Brooks, then back at me. "Very bad." The detective took over. "Our investigation uncovered substantial financial problems." I felt my pulse quicken. "What kind of problems?" "Debt." I wasn't surprised. Brittany always seemed obsessed with money. Expensive clothes, luxury vacations, designer handbags, new furniture every few months. Appearances mattered enormously to her. Still, I hadn't expected anything dramatic. Then Detective Brooks continued. "Credit card debt." I nodded. "Personal loans." Another nod. "Home equity borrowing." My stomach tightened. "And several delinquent accounts." Now I understood why William looked so concerned. This wasn't ordinary debt. This was serious. Potentially life-changing debt. "How much?" I asked quietly. The detective named a number. For several seconds, I genuinely thought I had misheard him. The amount exceeded $180,000. I felt dizzy. "That's impossible." Unfortunately, it wasn't. The documents proved it. Every loan, every balance, every missed payment, everything. William slowly organized the papers into a neat stack. Then he looked directly at me. "Darlene." "They're drowning." I stared at the table. Suddenly, dozens of conversations from the past few years began making sense. The obsession with money, the pressure to move, the discussions about selling assets, the constant questions about my finances. None of it had been random. They had been desperate. And desperate people often make dangerous choices. Detective Brooks continued. "It gets worse." I wasn't sure how that was possible. But apparently it was. "We recovered messages between Brittany and several lenders." My stomach sank. The detective opened another file. Many of those lenders were threatening legal action, foreclosure, collections, judgments. The words appeared repeatedly throughout the records. The picture became increasingly clear. Brittany wasn't merely struggling financially. She was panicking. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered the forged documents, the lies, the manipulation, the rumors about my mental health. The sympathy vanished. Financial hardship doesn't excuse betrayal. William pointed toward one particular document. "What about this?" The detective nodded. "That may be the most important piece." He handed me a printed email. I began reading. Halfway through, my chest tightened, because the email revealed something I hadn't expected. Brittany wasn't acting alone. Not originally. Months before the SUV disappeared, she had discussed a strategy with Ethan. A detailed strategy. Not about the vehicle. About me. Specifically, about gaining control of my finances. One sentence stood out immediately. "If we can prove she needs help managing things, everything becomes easier." I stared at the words. Unable to move. Unable to blink. unable to fully process what I was reading. Everything becomes easier, not helping me, not protecting me, controlling me. The distinction mattered a lot. I handed the document back. My hands were shaking. How long? Detective Brooks understood the question. The earliest messages date back nearly 18 months. 18 months. A year and a half. For 18 months, they had been discussing my finances behind my back. For 18 months, they had been developing plans, strategies, approaches, methods. And through all of it, I had continued trusting them. The realization was heartbreaking. But what came next was even worse. Detective Brooks opened another folder. Inside were text messages exchanged between Ethan and Brittany. One particular conversation had been highlighted. William read it first, then slowly passed it to me. Brittany, your mom trusts you completely? Ethan, I know. Brittany, then use that. The words hit me like a punch. Use that. Not appreciate it. Not protect it. Use it. Exploit it. Manipulate it. Leverage it. I felt tears forming. Not because of money. Not because of property. Because trust is sacred. Especially between a parent and child. And they had treated mine like a tool. The room remained quiet for several moments. Finally, I looked at Detective Brooks. What about Ethan? The detective leaned forward. What do you mean? How much of this was Brittany? A sad smile appeared on his face. The kind professionals use when they know someone doesn't want the answer they're about to receive. Darlene. His voice was gentle. Your son wasn't a bystander. I closed my eyes. Part of me already knew. Still, hearing it hurt. A lot. The detective continued. We have messages showing active participation. William nodded. I've reviewed them. I looked toward him. His expression confirmed everything. Ethan hadn't been manipulated into the scheme. He hadn't been pressured into it. He hadn't been dragged along unwillingly. He had chosen it. Repeatedly, knowingly, deliberately. One text message made that painfully clear. Ethan, if she won't agree voluntarily, we'll find another way. I stared at the sentence. Again and again. Because it sounded nothing like the son I raised. Nothing. The little boy who cried when he accidentally stepped on a frog. The teenager who volunteered at food drives. The young man who once stayed awake all night beside my hospital bed after a minor surgery. Where had that person gone? Or had I simply failed to see who he truly was becoming, as if sensing my thoughts? William spoke quietly. People don't change overnight. I looked at him. They change gradually. The truth of those words hurt, because gradual changes are easy to miss, especially when love blinds you. Eventually, Detective Brooks closed the folders. Then he looked directly at me. There is one more thing. My pulse quickened again. The lockbox. We had almost forgotten about it. Almost. What was inside? I asked. The detective exchanged a glance with William. Then he carefully opened the final file. Several documents. I leaned forward. What kind of documents? Legal documents. William immediately sat straighter. The detective continued. A handwritten letter. My heart skipped. A letter from Harold. Additional estate records. William's eyes widened. And documentation involving financial assets. The room fell silent. Because suddenly, we all understood the same thing. Harold hadn't hidden money. He had hidden information. Important information. Life-changing information. And whatever was inside that lockbox was significant enough to drive Ethan and Brittany into committing fraud, theft, and deception. Detective Brooks slowly placed the final folder on the table. Tomorrow, he said, we're going to review every document recovered from the lockbox. I stared at the folder, unable to look away. Because after months of lies, secrets, and betrayal, I was finally about to hear my husband's voice again. And somehow, I knew everything was about to change. The next afternoon, I sat at the large conference table in William Carter's office with a folder full of evidence in front of me. For weeks, I had felt like I was chasing shadows, suspicions, rumors, half-truths. Now there were facts, real facts, documents, messages, recordings, police reports. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Ethan and Brittany could no longer hide behind excuses. William had arranged a family meeting, not because he believed it would magically solve everything, but because several relatives had continued pressuring me to hear Ethan's side. According to them, there had been misunderstandings. According to them, family should handle family matters privately. According to them, I was being too harsh. So William suggested something simple.
Let everyone hear the truth.
All of it. The meeting took place in a private conference room at his office. Present were William, Detective Brooks, myself, Ethan, Brittany, my sister Linda, my cousin Rebecca, and 2 other close relatives who had been especially vocal about defending Ethan. When Ethan entered the room, he looked exhausted. The confident attitude he had displayed weeks earlier was gone. His shoulders sagged. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes. But despite everything, I still saw my son, and that made the entire situation hurt even more. Brittany entered behind him. Unlike Ethan, she still appeared determined, defiant, as though she believed she could somehow talk her way out of everything. Nobody spoke for several moments. The tension was overwhelming. Finally, William cleared his throat. We are here because there have been many accusations, assumptions, and misunderstandings. He paused. Today, we're focusing on facts. Nobody objected, because facts were difficult to argue with. William began with the vehicle sale. The registration documents, the ownership records, the forged paperwork, the dealership evidence, the security footage, one piece at a time, methodically, professionally. As he spoke, the atmosphere in the room changed. Slowly at first, then dramatically. My cousin Rebecca, who had spent weeks telling me I was overreacting, stared at the paperwork in disbelief. Linda looked shocked. The others sat silently, listening, processing, realizing. When William displayed copies of the dealership records showing Ethan selling the SUV, Nobody spoke. When Detective Brooks explained the investigation timeline, nobody spoke. And when the security photographs showing Ethan removing the lockbox from the hidden compartment appeared on the screen, the room became completely silent. Ethan lowered his head. Brittany crossed her arms. For the first time, neither of them attempted to interrupt. Then William moved to the next section, the text messages. I watched Ethan's face closely, because I knew what was coming. The messages discussing my finances, the messages discussing my assets, the messages discussing my mental competency. One after another appeared on the screen. The room grew increasingly uncomfortable. Then William displayed the message that had broken my heart. Your mom trusts you completely. Use that. I heard someone gasp softly. Linda, my sister. Tears filled her eyes as she stared at Ethan. Ethan? Her voice cracked. How could you? He didn't answer. Because there was no answer, at least none that could justify what he had done. Brittany finally spoke. This isn't fair. The room turned toward her. She pointed at the screen. Those messages are being taken out of context. Detective Brooks looked unimpressed. Then explain the context. For several seconds, she said nothing. Because there wasn't one. Not a believable one. Not anymore. Still, she tried. We were under pressure. Nobody responded. We had debts. Again. Silence. We were scared. I finally spoke. So you decided to steal from me? The question landed heavily. Brittany looked away. And for the first time since this began, I saw uncertainty in her eyes. Not remorse. Not guilt. Fear. Fear because the truth was no longer hidden. Then Ethan surprised everyone, including me. He stood up, slowly, quietly, and spoke. Brittany didn't do everything. The room froze. Brittany's eyes widened. Ethan. No. He shook his head. I made choices too. His voice sounded broken. I knew what we were doing. The confession hung in the air. Heavy, painful, necessary, for the first time. I heard genuine accountability. Not enough. Not nearly enough. But more than I had heard in months. Ethan looked directly at me. His eyes filled with tears. I should have stopped it. I said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Not yet. William then moved to the final piece of evidence. The recording. The one I had secretly made after Ethan and Brittany accused me of being confused. The recording played through the conference room speakers. Every word, every accusation, every attempt to paint me as mentally incapable. The silence afterward was devastating. Because nobody could deny what they had heard. Nobody. My relatives who once questioned me now avoided eye contact entirely. They finally understood. This had never been about concern. It had been about control. When the recording ended, William closed the file. Then he looked at me. Darlene, I nodded. He knew what was coming. Several weeks earlier, after everything began unraveling, I had updated my estate documents, not because of anger, because of reality. Trust had been broken, and broken trust has consequences. William opened another folder. Ethan, my son looked up. This concerns your mother's estate. The room became very quiet. Ethan immediately understood. His face went pale. William continued. Darlene has revised her will. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. William calmly explained the changes. The inheritance Ethan once expected had been dramatically reduced. Several charitable organizations now received substantial portions. A scholarship fund honoring Harold Johnston had been created. Additional funds were allocated to community health programs and children's education initiatives. The remainder would be distributed according to conditions that protected Darlene's financial independence. When William finished, the room sat in stunned silence. Ethan looked as though someone had punched him. Brittany appeared even worse, because she finally understood what her actions had cost. Not just money, trust, family, future opportunities, everything. Then Ethan looked at me. For a long time, without speaking, finally he whispered one sentence. You changed everything. I met his eyes. For the first time in months, I felt completely calm. No, Ethan. My voice was steady. You changed everything. The room remained silent. Because everyone knew it was true. Not me, not William, not Detective Brooks, not even Brittany. Ethan had made the decisions. Ethan had signed the papers. Ethan had taken the lockbox. Ethan had betrayed the trust I spent a lifetime building. And now he was facing the consequences. As the meeting ended, people slowly gathered their belongings. Nobody rushed toward Ethan. Nobody defended him. Nobody blamed me. The truth had finally spoken louder than the rumors. But before everyone left, Detective Brooks approached William. He carried a thick envelope. The envelope recovered from the lockbox. And judging by the expression on his face, whatever was inside was far more important than any of us realized. After everyone left William's office, only 4 people remained. William, Detective Brooks, myself, and the envelope recovered from the lockbox. The room felt strangely quiet, as though the building itself understood something important was about to happen. For weeks, the lockbox had existed almost like a legend. A mystery, a secret. An unanswered question sitting at the center of everything. Now it was finally in front of me. Real, tangible, waiting. I stared at the thick manila envelope lying on the conference table. My hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, from anticipation. Because whatever Harold had hidden inside had been important enough to protect for years. Important enough that Ethan and Brittany were willing to destroy our family trying to obtain it. William gently pushed the envelope toward me. I think you should open it. For a moment, I couldn't move. Then I slowly reached forward, carefully broke the seal, and opened the envelope. The first thing I saw was a handwritten letter. My breath caught instantly, because I recognized the handwriting immediately. Harold's. After 4 years, I would have recognized it anywhere. The sight alone nearly brought me to tears. William remained silent, Detective Brooks respectfully looked away. Both men understood this moment belonged to me. I carefully unfolded the letter. At the top were 3 simple words. My darling Darlene. The tears came immediately. I couldn't stop them. For a few seconds, I simply stared at the page, listening to memories flood through my mind. Harold's laugh, his voice, his smile, the way he used to hold my hand during difficult moments. Then I began reading. If you're reading this, it means I've been gone for some time. First, I need you to know something. Loving you was the greatest privilege of my life. The words blurred through tears. I paused, took a breath, then continued. I know you'll be grieving when you find this. I also know you'll be stronger than you realize. You've always been stronger than you think. I smiled through my tears. That sounded exactly like Harold. Always encouraging. Always believing in me more than I believed in myself. The next paragraph changed everything. Over the past few years, I've become concerned about something. Not because I doubt our son loves you. I know he does. But I've noticed changes in him that worry me. I stopped reading. The room suddenly felt colder. William slowly sat forward. Neither of us spoke. Because neither of us expected this. I continued. Sometimes love and entitlement begin to look alike. When that happens, people can convince themselves they deserve things they have not earned. My heart pounded. Harold had seen it. Years ago. Long before I did. Long before Ethan sold the SUV. Long before Brittany entered the picture. Harold had noticed warning signs. The realization was painful. But it wasn't finished. If Ethan has become the man I fear he may become, I need you to protect yourself. Love him. Forgive him when appropriate, but never surrender your independence to anyone. Tears rolled down my face. Because even in death, Harold had been trying to protect me, trying to guide me, trying to prepare me. The next sentence nearly broke me completely. I don't want you spending your final years asking permission to live your own life. I covered my mouth, unable to speak. Because that was exactly what Ethan and Brittany had wanted. Control. Permission. Dependence. Everything Harold feared. For several moments, nobody said anything. The room remained silent except for my quiet crying. Eventually, I gathered myself and continued reading. The remainder of the letter was filled with love, memories, advice, stories from our marriage, private jokes only the two of us would understand. By the time I reached the final paragraph, I could barely see through the tears. Live your life, Darlene. Drive the roads we never got to travel. See the places we talked about. Make new friends. Laugh often. And never let grief convince you that your story ended when mine did. The final line was simple. I'll love you forever, Harold. For a long time, nobody spoke. I simply sat there, holding the letter, feeling as though my husband had briefly returned to the room. Eventually, William cleared his throat. There are other documents, I nodded slowly, wiping my eyes. Then I reached back into the envelope. The next documents were legal records, estate paperwork, financial statements, investment records. At first, they appeared ordinary. Then William's expression changed dramatically. He adjusted his glasses, read one page, then another, then another. Darlene. His voice sounded stunned. What? You need to look at this. He handed me a document. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then the numbers registered. My eyes widened. A savings account. An account I had never seen before. One created years earlier. Jointly connected to Harold's estate planning structure. I looked at William. What is this? His expression remained shocked. This account was never activated while Harold was alive. I frowned. What does that mean? It means it remained untouched. My pulse quickened. How much is in it? William named the amount. I genuinely thought I had heard incorrectly. The account contained nearly $700,000. I stared at him. Speechless. Absolutely speechless. Harold and I had never been wealthy. Comfortable, yes. Wealthy, no. Yet somehow he had quietly built a financial reserve over many years. A reserve intended solely for my future security. The discovery left me overwhelmed. Not because of the money itself. Because of what it represented. Love, planning, protection. Everything Harold had spent his life providing. Detective Brooks leaned forward. There are additional records. William nodded. Several more documents outlined instructions related to the account. The wording was unmistakable. The funds belonged solely to me. No shared authority. No outside control. No conditions. Just protection. Then we found one final document. A brief handwritten note attached to the account records. William read it first, then handed it to me. The note said, if you're holding this, then someone probably found the lockbox before you did. If that happened, remember something important. The money isn't the real inheritance. I frowned, then continued reading. The real inheritance is your freedom. I closed my eyes. The words hit harder than any financial figure ever could. Because Harold understood something many people never learn. Money matters, but freedom matters more. The freedom to choose. The freedom to live independently. The freedom to maintain dignity. The freedom to remain yourself. For several minutes, none of us spoke. Eventually, Detective Brooks gathered the documents. This evidence also helps establish motive. I nodded. Of course it did. The existence of hidden financial records explained why Ethan and Brittany had become so obsessed. Why they searched the vehicle. Why they took the lockbox. Why they were willing to commit fraud. But strangely, anger no longer dominated my thoughts. Sadness did. Because all of this could have been avoided. Every lie, every betrayal, every investigation, every broken relationship, all unnecessary, had Ethan simply remained the man I raised. As the meeting ended, William carefully returned Harold's letter to me. Keep this safe. I will, he smiled gently. I think Harold would be proud of you. I looked down at the letter, then out the window. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt since this nightmare began. Peace. Not complete peace. Not yet. There was still legal business ahead. Still consequences. Still difficult conversations. But now I had something stronger than anger. I had certainty. And with certainty came strength. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan was preparing to face consequences far more serious than a changed inheritance. Because the criminal investigation was entering its final stage. The criminal investigation reached its conclusion faster than I expected. Perhaps because there was simply too much evidence, too many documents, too many messages, too many admissions. By that point, the facts were impossible to dispute. The forged paperwork, the unauthorized sale, the hidden lockbox. The text messages discussing plans to gain control of my assets. Everything pointed in the same direction. And for the first time since this began, Ethan was no longer pretending otherwise. A week after we opened Harold's letter, Detective Brooks called with an update. The prosecutor's office has completed its review. I sat quietly at my kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling beside me. What happens now? The case will move forward. His answer was calm, professional, expected. Still, hearing it made my chest tighten. Because no matter what Ethan had done, he was still my son. A mother never completely separates herself from that truth, even when she wishes she could. Will he go to prison? The question escaped before I could stop it. Detective Brooks paused. That depends on several factors. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. There are negotiations happening, meaning attorneys, plea agreements, restitution, consequences, real consequences. After the call ended, I sat alone for a long time, not celebrating, not feeling victorious, just tired, deeply tired, because justice isn't always satisfying. Sometimes it simply hurts less than injustice. 3 days later, William invited me to another meeting. This time only Ethan would be present. No Brittany, no relatives, no audience, just my son. Part of me didn't want to go. Another part knew I needed to. There were things that still needed to be said. Questions that still needed answers. When I arrived, Ethan was already sitting in the conference room. The moment I saw him, my heart sank. He looked different, not physically, emotionally, defeated. His confidence had disappeared. His arrogance had disappeared. Even his anger had disappeared. For the first time in months, I saw the frightened little boy hidden beneath the grown man. Neither of us spoke immediately. The silence stretched between us. Heavy, awkward, painful. Finally, Ethan looked up. "Hi, Mom," I nodded. "Hello?" His eyes filled with tears almost instantly. And despite everything, seeing that still hurt me. Because mothers don't stop loving their children when they're disappointed. If anything, disappointment hurts precisely because love remains. Ethan looked down at his hands. I don't know where to start. Neither did I. There wasn't a handbook for conversations like this. No guide for discussing betrayal between a mother and son. Eventually, he took a deep breath. I'm sorry. The words sounded sincere. Genuinely sincere. But something inside me remained still. Not cold. Not angry. Just cautious. Because apologies are easy. Trust is difficult. I know. He looked surprised by my response. Perhaps he expected me to reject the apology immediately. I didn't, but accepting an apology and restoring trust are not the same thing. For several moments, he simply sat there. Then he spoke again. Everything fell apart. I remained quiet, listening, waiting. After the investigation started, Brittany blamed me for everything. That didn't surprise me, not even a little. When things got serious, she stopped answering calls. Again, was not surprising. Then she moved out. That part caught my attention. I hadn't known. Ethan laughed bitterly. Not a happy laugh. The kind people make when reality finally catches them. She left the day after her attorney got involved. The room grew quiet. For years, Ethan had chosen Brittany over everyone else, including me. Now she was gone, and he was alone. I wish I could say I felt satisfaction. I didn't. Mostly, I felt sad, because destruction is tragic even when it's deserved. Then Ethan said something unexpected. It wasn't really about Brittany. I frowned. What do you mean? He stared at the table. Long enough that I wondered if he would answer. Finally, he did. I wanted the money. The honesty stunned me. Perhaps because it was the first truly honest thing he'd said in months. I wanted the security. He swallowed hard. I wanted the easier life. Every sentence hurt, yet strangely, the truth also brought relief. No more excuses. No more blaming. No more pretending. Just truth. Ugly truth. But truth nonetheless. I kept telling myself I deserved it. His voice cracked. I told myself you had more than enough. I closed my eyes. Because I had heard that reasoning before, not from Ethan. From countless people who justified taking what wasn't theirs. They convinced themselves the victim won't suffer. That the victim won't notice. That the victim already has enough. Anything to avoid calling theft by its real name. Then came the statement that hurt most. I stopped seeing you as my mother. My eyes opened immediately. Ethan was crying openly now. I started seeing you as an opportunity. The words hit harder than any insult ever could, because deep down, I already knew they were true. Still, hearing them aloud felt devastating. The room remained silent. Neither of us knew what to say. Eventually, Ethan continued. There were other times. I frowned. What? He looked away, ashamed. There were other times I took money. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. What do you mean? His answer came quietly. So small you never noticed. I felt my chest tighten. The story continued. A few $100s borrowed without asking. A reimbursement check redirected years earlier. Small amounts, not enough to attract attention. Not enough to trigger alarm. each incident minor by itself. Together, they painted a disturbing picture, a pattern, a habit, a progression. And suddenly, so many confusing moments from the past made sense. Missing paperwork, financial discrepancies, things I had dismissed, things I had ignored. Not because they weren't real, because I trusted my son. Tears filled my eyes. Not because of the money, never because of the money, because every confession revealed years of deception. Years, not months, years. Finally, Ethan looked directly at me. I don't expect forgiveness. His voice shook. I don't deserve it. I remained silent. Because I wasn't ready to answer that question. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. Then he said something else. Something I hadn't expected. I'm going to accept responsibility. I studied his face, trying to determine whether he meant it. This time I believed he did. Perhaps because he no longer had anything left to gain. No inheritance, no financial advantage, no strategic reason, just consequences. And truth. As our meeting ended, Ethan stood, then hesitated. Mom, I looked up. I know I destroyed things. His voice trembled. But I want to become someone Dad wouldn't be ashamed of. For the first time that afternoon, emotion overwhelmed me. Because Harold had loved Ethan deeply. Even when he worried about him. Even when he saw flaws I missed. Harold never stopped loving him. Neither had I. That was the tragedy. And perhaps the hope. I stood and walked toward the door. Before leaving, I turned back. There are consequences, Ethan. I know. And some things may never fully heal. A tear rolled down his cheek. I know. I nodded slowly, then spoke the truth. The consequences are yours to face. For the first time since this nightmare began, he didn't argue. He simply nodded. Because finally, he understood. And sometimes, understanding is the beginning of change, even when it arrives far too late. The months that followed were quieter than I expected. Not easier, just quieter. The court proceedings moved forward. Attorneys handled paperwork. Agreements were negotiated. Financial restitution plans were established. Eventually, a resolution was reached that held Ethan accountable, while also acknowledging his cooperation with investigators. The details mattered less to me than one simple fact. The truth had finally prevailed. No more lies. No more manipulation. No more pretending. For the first time in a very long time, I could breathe again. Yet, even after the legal matters were largely settled, one question remained. Could I ever forgive my son? People talk about forgiveness as though it's a switch, as though one morning you wake up and simply decide. That wasn't my experience. Forgiveness was much more complicated, much more painful, much more gradual. Some days, I felt compassion. Other days, I felt anger. Some days, I remembered Ethan as the little boy who ran into my arms after school. Other days, I remembered the man who forged paperwork and tried to convince people I was mentally incapable. Both versions existed. And learning to hold those truths at the same time was difficult. One afternoon, nearly 6 months after our meeting in William's office, Ethan called. His voice sounded nervous. "Mom? Hello? Ethan?" There was a brief pause. Then he asked the question I had known was coming eventually. "Can we meet?" I stared out my kitchen window. Watching birds gather around the feeder Harold had built years earlier. Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me wanted more time. Part of me wasn't sure any amount of time would ever feel sufficient. Yet another part understood something important. Healing requires movement, not forgetting, not excusing, but moving. "Okay," I said. The relief in his voice was immediate. We met at a small park near my neighborhood. Neutral ground. Public, comfortable, safe. The same park where Harold and I once walked on summer evenings. When I arrived, Ethan was already there, sitting on a bench beneath a large oak tree. For a moment, I simply watched him. He looked older, not physically, emotionally. Consequences tend to age people, especially consequences they earned themselves. When he saw me approaching, he stood immediately. Neither of us hugged. Not yet. We sat down together, leaving a small distance between us. The silence wasn't awkward, just honest. Finally, Ethan spoke. "I've been in counseling," I nodded. "I know. William had mentioned it." Ethan stared at the ground. "For a long time, I blamed everyone else." His voice was calm, reflective. "I blamed Brittany." I said nothing. "I blamed debt." Silence. "I blamed stress." Still silence. Then he looked at me. But eventually I ran out of people to blame. The statement carried more weight than he probably realized. Because accountability begins where excuses end. And for the first time, Ethan seemed genuinely accountable. I spent months talking about Dad. My chest tightened slightly. Harold. Even now, hearing his name carried emotion. The counselor asked me a question. Ethan laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because it was uncomfortable. He asked whether Dad would trust me. I already knew the answer. Apparently, Ethan did too. Tears formed in his eyes. I couldn't say yes. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The wind moved gently through the trees. Children played in the distance. Life continued around us. Ordinary life. The kind of life that keeps moving regardless of heartbreak. Then Ethan turned toward me. "I know I don't deserve another chance." I considered his words carefully, because they contained an important misunderstanding. "This isn't about deserving," he frowned. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath. Forgiveness isn't a reward. The confusion remained on his face. So I continued. "It's something I do for myself." The realization slowly settled over him. For years, I believed forgiveness meant pretending nothing happened. Pretending the pain disappeared. Pretending trust automatically returned. Now I understood differently. Forgiveness meant releasing the constant burden of anger. It didn't erase consequences. It didn't restore trust overnight. It simply freed me from carrying bitterness forever. "Ethan,"
He looked at me. I forgive you. The words surprised even me, not because they weren't true.
Because I hadn't planned to say them. Yet in that moment, they felt right, necessary, healthy. Tears immediately filled his eyes. But before he could speak, I continued. That doesn't mean everything is fixed. His expression changed. From relief to understanding. I know. I love you. His shoulders trembled. But trust has to be rebuilt. He nodded. I know. It may take years. Another nod. I know. And some things may never be exactly what they were. This time, he simply lowered his head. Because he knew that, too. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan quietly asked a question. Do you think Dad would forgive me? The question broke my heart. Because I knew Harold. Better than anyone. I thought about his letter, his warnings, his concerns, his love, and finally I answered honestly, yes. Ethan looked up immediately. Really? Eventually, a weak smile appeared through his tears. Because Harold had never been perfect. But he had always believed people could change. The real question wasn't whether Harold would forgive Ethan. The real question was whether Ethan would become someone worthy of that forgiveness. As the afternoon continued, we talked more openly than we had in years. No manipulation, no hidden agendas, no arguments, just honesty. For the first time, Ethan didn't ask about money, didn't ask about assets, didn't ask about inheritance. Instead, he asked about me, my volunteer work, my friends, my plans, the simple questions a son should ask his mother. When we finally stood to leave, he hesitated, then opened his arms slightly, not assuming, not demanding, just offering. I stepped forward and hugged him. Briefly, carefully, gently. It wasn't a magical moment. The pain didn't disappear, the past didn't vanish, but something shifted. A small step, a beginning, nothing more, nothing less. As I drove home afterward, I thought about something Harold once told me. Relationships aren't destroyed in a single day. And they're rarely repaired in one either. Healing happens through choices. Small choices, repeated consistently over time. Perhaps Ethan had finally begun making different choices. Perhaps not. Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. I would never again surrender my independence to keep someone else comfortable. Not my son. Not anyone.
Because love without boundaries becomes sacrifice. And sacrifice without limits eventually becomes self-destruction. I had spent enough years giving pieces of myself away. Now it was time to protect what remained. And surprisingly, that decision felt less like punishment and more like freedom. A year after I reported my own son for stealing my car, I found myself standing in a place I never expected to be, happy. Not because everything had been repaired. Not because the past had disappeared. Not because life had become perfect. I was happy because I had finally found myself again. For a long time after Harold died, I believed my story was ending. Not immediately, Not dramatically, just slowly. The way many older people begin disappearing from their own lives without realizing it, the world starts treating you differently. People assume you need help, assume you need permission, assume your best years are behind you. And if you're not careful, you begin believing them. I almost did. Then everything happened. The vehicle, the betrayal, the investigation, the court proceedings, the shattered trust, the painful truth. At the time, it felt like my world was falling apart. Looking back now, I realized something surprising. My world wasn't ending. It was being rebuilt, one choice at a time, one boundary at a time, one act of courage at a time. 3 months after my conversation with Ethan in the park, I made a decision Harold would have loved. I bought my SUV back. When Detective Brooks first told me the dealership was willing to cooperate, I never imagined that possibility. The vehicle had been recovered as part of the investigation. After all the legal complications were resolved, an opportunity arose to purchase it again. The moment I saw it sitting on the lot, tears filled my eyes. There it was. The same dark blue SUV, the same vehicle Harold had chosen, the same vehicle that carried years of memories, the same vehicle that somehow survived the most difficult chapter of my life. I walked around it slowly, touching the door, the hood, the mirrors, almost like greeting an old friend. When I finally sat behind the wheel again, I smiled. Because for the first time in a very long while, something felt right. Not fixed. Not perfect. Right. A few weeks later, I fulfilled a promise. Not a promise to Ethan. Not a promise to anyone else. A promise to Harold and to myself. I took a road trip for years. Harold and I had talked about traveling after retirement, seeing small towns, exploring national parks, taking scenic roads simply because they looked interesting. Then cancer interrupted those plans. After he died, I assumed those dreams died too. But Harold's letter changed that. Live your life, Darlene. The words stayed with me, so I packed a suitcase, loaded the SUV, and started driving. No complicated itinerary, no strict schedule, just freedom. The first stop was a small town in Tennessee, then Kentucky, then the mountains of North Carolina. Along the way, I met wonderful people, retired couples, solo travelers, grandparents exploring the country, people who reminded me that life doesn't stop at 67, or 70, or 80. Life only stops when we stop participating in it. One evening, while sitting on the porch of a small bed and breakfast, I realized something. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about betrayal. I wasn't thinking about investigations. I wasn't thinking about courtrooms. I was simply enjoying the sunset. That moment mattered. Because healing often arrives quietly, not with fireworks, not with dramatic speeches, just a sunset that suddenly feels beautiful again. When I returned home, I continued building a different life. I became more involved at the community center, started mentoring younger nurses, joined a local travel group, made new friends, real friends, people who liked me for who I was rather than what I owned. Meanwhile, Ethan continued his own journey, slowly, imperfectly, honestly. We spoke regularly, not every day, not even every week, but consistently. Trust rebuilt itself one small brick at a time. Never quickly. Never automatically. Always through actions. Sometimes he helped around the house. Sometimes we shared lunch. Sometimes we simply talked. The conversations felt different now. Healthier, more honest. There was no discussion about inheritance, no discussion about assets, no hidden agendas, just a mother and son trying to find a path forward. As for Brittany, she eventually moved to another state. I heard occasional updates through mutual acquaintances. Nothing dramatic. Nothing particularly important. For the first time in years, her choices no longer affected my life. And that felt liberating. One afternoon, nearly 2 years after everything began, Ethan visited unexpectedly. We sat on my back porch drinking iced tea. Watching birds gather near Harold's old feeder. After a long silence, Ethan asked a question. "Do you think Dad knew all this would happen?" I thought about it carefully, then smiled. "No." Ethan looked surprised. "You don't?" I shook my head. "No. What do you think he knew?" I looked toward the garden. The flowers were blooming beautifully. Bright colors everywhere. Signs of growth. Signs of life. I think he knew people make mistakes. Ethan remained quiet, listening. I think he knew love isn't enough by itself. I paused. I think he knew character matters. Tears appeared in Ethan's eyes. Not dramatic tears. Quiet tears. The kind that arrive when someone finally understands a lesson. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Then he whispered something I'll never forget. "I'm trying to become better." I believed him, not because he said it, because I had seen it. Over time, through actions. The only evidence that truly matters. As evening approached, Ethan left. I watched him drive away. Then I walked to the garage, opened the door, and smiled. The SUV sat exactly where it belonged, back home, just like me. Because that vehicle was never really the story. The real story was about dignity, independence, boundaries, self-respect. The courage to stand up for yourself even when the person hurting you is someone you love. Especially when the person hurting you is someone you love. Reporting my son was the hardest decision I ever made. But it was also the right one. Not because it punished him. Because it protected me. And in an unexpected way. It may have saved him too. As the sun began setting that evening, I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and headed toward the open road. Not running from the past, not chasing revenge, simply moving forward. The way Harold always hoped I would. And for the first time in a very long time, the road ahead looked beautiful. Sometimes the greatest acts of love require the greatest courage. For much of my life, I believed being a good mother meant sacrificing everything for my child. I believed love meant endless forgiveness, endless patience, and endless second chances. But life taught me a difficult lesson. Love without boundaries can become permission for others to hurt us. Standing up for yourself does not mean you love someone less. It means you finally love yourself too. One of the hardest truths we face as parents is accepting that our children are responsible for their own choices. We can teach values. We can provide opportunities. We can offer guidance. But eventually, every person chooses their own path. When Ethan betrayed my trust, I had a choice. I could ignore the truth to keep the peace, or I could face the truth and protect myself. Neither option was easy, but only one allowed me to keep my dignity. Another lesson I learned is that independence matters at every age. Growing older does not mean surrendering your voice, your decisions, or your freedom. Your life remains your own. Your dreams still matter. Your future still belongs to you. Most importantly, I learned that forgiveness and accountability can exist together. Forgiveness does not erase consequences. It does not erase pain. It simply allows us to move forward without carrying bitterness forever. Healing is possible. Trust can sometimes be rebuilt. And even after heartbreak, life can surprise us with new beginnings. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with someone you loved? What lessons stayed with you the most? Share your experience below. And if you enjoy heartfelt stories about family, resilience, and second chances, please like, subscribe, and join our community wherever you're watching from. Let me know your location and the current time there. I'd love to hear from you.